My paranormal experiences, all of my life, I've dealt with ghosts and demons. It seems like it's a constant and recurring event or events in my life. And from time to time, I can remember in my childhood, I've always been able to see ghosts. Not that anyone ever said they believed me, at least not back then. It was only years later that I learned it was quite common among the women in my family to see things others could not. My first recollection was around the age of 4, maybe 5. I saw what at the time, there were 2 men, and I called them Union soldiers, which my mom thought was interesting because I didn't know anything about the Civil War. But I would see them most nights, not every night, but most nights. They would walk down the hallway of our home. They were dressed in uniforms, carrying muskets. And after I was afraid of them for several weeks, one night I sat up in bed and just looked at them and went, "Hi." One of them didn't respond, like it didn't even notice I was there. And the other one turned and he raised his fingers to his lips and went, "Shh." That was the last time I ever remember seeing those 2 ghosts. And other than typical closet monsters and monsters under the bed that, most children deal with, I don't have any significant memories in that particular home. But that all changed several years later. Now, when I was growing up too, in my preteen years and even into, the 12 to 13 range, my mom, she was really big into ghosts. And she and a cousin who was about her same age and the cousin's children, and we were close as sisters, we would get in the car and we would go driving and we'd go up a hollow where my mother's family had grown up. And mom would tell us about ghost stories of chains rattling and ghostly lights, rocking chairs that moved on their own. And that particular area had a lot of wonderful supernatural stories. And so I found my interest in the paranormal at a very young age. Even though I'd had the ghost experience, being 3 or 4, it was kind of sketchy in my memory at that time. But in 1979, I was an early teen, and mom and dad basically were wanting to buy a new house. And at about the same time, I started experiencing really severe health problems with my heart. And doctors were even talking about heart surgery. And I was going through all kinds of cardiac tests, and nobody could figure out what was going on with me. And of course, mom and dad were very worried, as any parent would be. They'd already put their home up for sale. It was pending contract, and they had to find something very quickly. Mom found the house that she thought, "Oh my gosh, this is the one. I really love it." The house had never had any problems at all before that. But during the home inspection, they found a gas problem in the house, a gas leak. And literally, it was going to be so expensive and take so long to actually repair it that mom basically had to go and start searching all over again from square one. And she finally settled on a place that she actually didn't like, but it was within their budget, especially with my healthcare cost going on at the time. It almost seemed like we were maneuvered into this house in some ways. I'm not trying to be hyperbolic about that, but this house, there was something odd about it. So we moved in shortly thereafter. It was a small, modest block house. It had been built in the 30s. There was a loft upstairs where my room was, and then 2 bedrooms downstairs. And then things slowly started happening. We would hear knocks and noises and footsteps. And some of those things, at the time we were explaining away that it was the house moving and expanding, or if the heat was on or whatever, that the wood would swell, all the things that we tell ourselves, when we're trying to debunk a haunting. But one of the bedrooms in the downstairs basically started having a raw sewage smell to it. There was nothing at all wrong with the plumbing. There was no septic tank. There was nothing that should have created this smell. My dad crawled under the house. There were no dead animals. There was nothing that would have created this smell, but this room always smelled like methane or raw sewage. We had health inspectors come in. The air tests were fine. Again, we had plumbers come in. There was nothing going on as to why this would happen. And it wasn't any particular time when it would happen. It just randomly happened. So it wasn't like a plumbing venting problem or something along that line. Now, I can't tell you everything that happened in this house chronologically, so I kind of blocked it into at least cohesive pieces of my story. So again, things again kept getting weird. And the weirder the house got, the more my health improved. And that was a very strange thing too. I still to this day, I'm now a trained demonologist, and still to this day, I have no idea why my health improved as things in the house got worse. But lights would flicker. The electric didn't work well. My dad completely rewired the house. He replumbed the house. And then there were times when we would smell like something was burning in the house, and we would literally go all through the house and, look at the sockets and different things, and nothing was ever burning. Dad would check the wires. He was very afraid of a house fire. And so he over-engineered things, and he, made sure that nothing was overloaded on the electric box or whatever. And we could never find this source of this burning smell. And even after Dad replaced, the water pipes, they were old copper pipes, we would still get just this foul odor in the water, like really bad well water, that methane smell with well water. And every now and then the water would just be black. When I saw Amityville Horror years later, I was like, oh my gosh, that's what that is. And I now know it probably wasn't. It was probably just something in the water lines. But still, it just added to the fact that if it could go wrong with this house, it went wrong. The heat in the house, it didn't matter how high we set the heat, the house was never, ever, ever warm. And then in the following fall, things really started to get really strange. At this point, we started to feel like there was someone watching us, or something watching us, I should say. Upstairs, in the loft where my room was, that was the worst. I've since learned about high EMFs and fear cage effect and things of that nature, but there were no wires. There was no copper pipes. There were nothing exposed, nothing that should have caused really high EMF spikes. So since I didn't have the equipment, I can't say that wasn't it, but this situation where we were feeling watched progressively got worse. There were times that I would hear footsteps on the stairs, and it sounded like somebody was coming upstairs. Or my mom would be downstairs and we'd hear footsteps, and it would sound like somebody was going downstairs. There was one time I literally heard somebody walking up the stairs. I thought it was Mom, and being a stupid teenager, I jumped out and went, to try to scare her. Not actually at that time thinking that she could fall down the stairs and get hurt, but there was nobody there. So she was actually downstairs cooking dinner. And so that's when I finally started saying, Mom, there's something wrong with the house. I'm hearing things in the house. And she was like, I'm hearing things too. There were times you could be downstairs and you would hear somebody stomping across the floor of my bedroom, or you would be upstairs and you would hear doors slamming downstairs. It was petrifying to be in that house by yourself at any point. Lights would flicker, and when we had the stomping sounds upstairs, pictures would actually rattle against the wall and even fall off the wall. Another thing that would happen is televisions would just turn randomly on and off in the middle of the night. You could be sitting and watching TV, and of course, this is back in the 70s and the 80s. We didn't have those wonderful remotes that they have now. And literally the dial would turn to another channel. Radios would come on and off. We had a radio that would play that had no batteries in it whatsoever. The phone would ping like it was going to ring. And of course, this was the old corded, hang-up phones. But it would ping like it was getting ready to ring, like somebody was like flicking the bell inside the phone. My father, of course, he was the skeptic of the family. He never liked to admit it. But years later, it was actually interesting, because he finally did tell me that he could hear people in the house. He heard the footsteps, he heard the voices, and that, he was just trying to be brave so that we weren't scared. He eventually admitted that, the house was haunted. There were times that we would have crashing sounds that sounded like entire shelves of books were falling down, or entire closets were just falling, the doors would open and everything fell out of a closet, that kind of sound, or it sounded like all the pots and pans fell. But there was nothing out of place. But these noises were huge, to the point where they would wake us up out of a dead sleep. Or if we were awake, they were jump scares. They were really loud noises. We had times when we would hear, Mom and I would hear each other call each other's names. Dad was at work and Mom had gone to the grocery store, and I heard the back door. It was a screen door. It had a very, very distinct click. When it opened, the springs would make a noise and the door would slam. So I went downstairs, to help her put away the groceries. And she wasn't there. Her car wasn't even in the driveway, but that screen door had banged. I heard the back door open and shut back. I heard, wrestling around in the kitchen like somebody was in there, and there was nobody home but me. We would have random smells of cologne and cigarette smell in the house. And there were times I wasn't a smoker, but I would actually see sitting in my room, how the end of a cherry, lights up on a cigarette. I would see that red glow, and then there would be a puff of smoke, and then I would smell cigarette smoke in my room when no one else was in there. And I know that this sounds really crazy, and I do apologize for that. Mom would go through the house saying a prayer, and all of these things, would just immediately stop, but they didn't stop for long. There were times there was the sound of what I would refer to as calliope music, like the 1900s calliope music throughout the house. And it wasn't just me hearing it. It wasn't just Mom hearing it. We'd hear it at the same time. There were also times we could hear what sounded like a church choir singing. It was very loud. It was usually bringing in the sheaves for some reason. Very nice sounding choir, but that was just a weird thing to hear because there were no churches close enough to us to hear something like that. Doors were constantly opening on their own. We would come home. All the cabinet doors in the kitchen would be open. All the drawers would be open. The closets would be open. But nothing was ever amiss. Nothing was ever stolen. Like it had been a burglary. All the doors had been locked. Any animals that we had during this time period would sit at the bottom of the stairs and look up and just shake or bark, or none of them would go upstairs. I could never have an animal come upstairs. They just wouldn't go up there. And if I carried them up, they would immediately run back down the stairs. They wouldn't stay in my room area. We had shadow people. We would see shadows crossing through the house. They were, human sized. And for some reason, they really liked going across the hallway and going into the main bathroom downstairs. Honestly, it happened so much that we actually got to where we didn't even mention it when we saw the shadows in the house. I do have to share a funny incident. My dad was working midnights, and, I was sleeping with Mom. Even as a teenager, I was too scared to sleep on my own at this point with all the stuff going on in the house. So Dad was at work. We heard something upstairs. I mean, it was boom, boom, like somebody was breaking through a window. So Mom got up to check. And of course, me being a silly teenager, got up to go with her. And Mom and Dad were not into guns or anything like that. So I grabbed the only weapon I could think of, which was a glass Coke bottle. So Mom's peering around the corner, looking up the stairs to see if anything's upstairs. And then she steps back and bumps into me and turns around. I've got the Coke bottle raised above my head like I was going to hit somebody in the head with it. And I think I almost gave my mom a heart attack. So of all the things, we found that laughter was probably the greatest defense against all the things that were trying to scare us in this house. We would have things that go missing, like jewelry, money. My homework went missing a couple times. You can't tell a teacher that a ghost stole your homework. They're not going to buy that. They don't buy the dog ate the homework. Definitely not going to buy the ghost stole the homework. But, that happened more often than not. So, again, it was a lot of small random stuff that was going on. It was creepy. It was really scary when you were home alone. But Mom called the previous owner of the house. They swore nothing like that had ever happened. But an interesting thing occurred about 20 years later. Mom was having, and this was after I'd moved out, Mom was having the house remodeled, and the contractors removed a wall. And they said that, from what they could tell, it was an original wall. It had never been, patched or anything. But Mom found the previous owner's wallet inside the wall, along with some other old pictures. And so, she called the previous owner again. The guy was like, yeah, I lost a wallet years ago. He came and he got it. He didn't know who the pictures belonged to, but the name on the back of one of the pictures was who he thought he bought the house from originally. So how these things got into the wall, we have no idea. Again, all the knocks and the bangs, and this happened inside and outside the house. My dad He installed motion sensor lighting. It would go off every night. And he put it up high enough to where it would take a human to actually set off motion sensor light. But what was interesting was every night it went off at 2:22 exactly, every single night. So again, there's a lot more to the story. This is basic, typical, ooh, this isn't scary. It gets worse. So we did have some good ghosts in the house. My grandfather had passed away when I was young, and he was seen in the house quite a bit, to the point where my daughter, when she was about 3, who had never met him, actually was able to describe him because she could see him clearly. She described him down to his favorite gold color shirt he always wore. And she was able to pick him out of a batch of pictures. Mom just set up like a dozen pictures on the table. And, my daughter immediately went, yeah, that's granddad. She called my dad Poppy. She called her other grandfather Pawpaw. She didn't have a granddad in her life. So that term was unfamiliar to her. And she immediately, she called him my grandfather granddad the whole time and picked out his picture very easily. We had a little girl ghost in the house as well. We called her Elizabeth. I don't know if that was her name, but she seemed to respond to it. And she very much liked the cartoon channels. And so she was one of the worst ones to change what you were watching on television. And if you got up to go get a soda and you came back in, Cartoon Network was on. And there was one night Mom was in bed and she was watching television. And again, this was about the time when the cable boxes came out. You still didn't really have a good remote. And she kept feeling like the TV kept kind of staticking and messing up. And so Mom goes, okay, Elizabeth, if you want to watch cartoons, change the channel. And immediately it went to the Cartoon Network, like with a matter of seconds. So again, there were good ghosts there too. We had other people that also had experiences in the house. My aunt was at the house one day when we had a crashing sound that sounded like a china cabinet full of plates and dishes had fallen over and just glass had broken everywhere. And it sounded like it came from the living room. And when we went in there was nothing out of place. It was just this horrible, horrible crashing sound. I had a cousin who stayed with us for a few weeks, and the closet door in the room that she stayed in would open by itself. And she was hearing grumblings and growls and, things that just made her feel very uncomfortable. And she moved out within a matter of about 3 or 4 weeks. She said that she would rather be homeless, although she didn't end up homeless, but she would rather be homeless than stay in a haunted house. Another cousin of mine was coming down the stairs and fell. And he said, he swore that it felt like someone had pulled his foot forward off the step that caused him to fall. And, being touched, having things thrown at us, having our clothes tugged, that was not unusual at all. In fact, I am pushing up to the 60 mark now, and I'm still scared to sleep with my feet outside of the covers because of the grabbing of the feet that I experienced when I was younger. And that sounds crazy that, an old lady would be afraid that her feet were exposed and the under the bed monster would get her. But sadly, that's still an issue with me. There were times in the house you would actually feel something that was so close. You could actually feel something breathing on you. It would breathe on our necks. It would breathe on our face. You get that hair standing up on the back of your neck feeling. They would touch us. It loved to pull hair. The back of the arm was very common, almost like if somebody grabs the back of your arm, like they're trying to control where you're walking or to let you know they're in control of a situation. It was that type of threatening touching, I think would be the best way I could put it. It was at a pressure and in a manner that felt threatening or controlling, I think would be the best way I could put that. I had a boyfriend over. I wasn't allowed to car date yet, but boys could come over and watch movies. And he had his arm around me and we were watching a movie, and all of a sudden he jerked his arm away and got really mad at me because he said I pinched him. And I was like, I didn't pinch you. And he was like, yeah, you pinched me. And so, we flipped on the light and he literally had a red mark, like something had pinched him. And he immediately left and we never went out again. He didn't believe in ghosts, even though I tried to say, oh, it's our ghost. And so he thought I was an idiot or crazy or something. And he left and I never talked to him again. Another thing that we experienced is blankets would be tugged on to the point they would be violently pulled off of us. There were times it was gentle. We'd wake up and the blankets would be in the floor. We could kind of logic, well, maybe I kicked the blanket off. But there were several nights that, literally something would tug the blanket. You'd pull it back up and then something would rip it off the bed and throw it across the room. And I don't mean like a half a foot. I'm talking 3 or 4 feet across the room. My daughter one time was staying with my mom while I was at work. Again, this is not chronological. I do have to apologize. But mom had a crystal bell that she always kept on her television, the old console TVs. And the crystal bell, mom had walked back into the living room about the same time this happened. And this bell basically lifted straight up from the TV and flew straight over to my daughter and landed right in front of her. I mean, mom said it happened so fast, that she couldn't even react to it. Another time, as far as, again, experience was with other people, we had a porch swing. And my boyfriend at that particular time kept seeing a black shadow pacing back and forth in the yard. And he felt very uncomfortable, like he wasn't supposed to be there. And so, he left. He felt kind of like this thing was threatening him. He did believe in ghosts, and this thing creeped him out really bad. We had a storage building on the property. It was, kind of falling in, and we didn't use it, but we just never torn it down. And you would literally hear noises inside this building, scraping noises, knocking, things of that nature. I was too afraid, honestly, to really go into it or be around it much. And Dad always told me it was really dangerous and not to go in there because he thought the floor would fall through into the cellar. But at the same time, that floor was very sturdy. I think, again, it was one of those times that Dad just didn't admit that he had seen or heard something around that building. We also had an old well on the property. It had a steel slab that had been welded on the top of it to make it safe. And you could hear things knocking on the bottom side of the steel slab, like knocking from underneath. You talk about something that was extremely creepy. Now, could that have been heat expansion? Maybe, but it really sounded like something was knocking on the underside of this metal. Years later, Mom and Dad had to move out of state for Dad's job. His company had gone under, and so they had to leave the state for a while. They had rented the house because they didn't want to sell it, and the renters were really good people, salt of the earth people. They wouldn't have done anything to damage the house. And one night, Mom gets a call in the middle of the night, and the building that had been out back literally just caught fire and burned to the ground. The fire marshal couldn't say what caused it. They could find no sign of arson. It was like it self-combusted and just burnt to the ground. And these people moved out pretty quick after that. They didn't say anything about any experiences in the house or anything, but they got out of there pretty quick. But again, we knew that the building, it wasn't arson. Nobody set the fire. It just burned down. The last person, as far as other people's story I want to relay, is one of the most compelling and one of the creepiest that I can tell you about. We were hosting some missionaries that had come to our church, and they were staying with us. It was a young couple. They had 2 small kids, so we made the kids kind of like a little camp in the living room where they could sleep in sleeping bags. And, Mom had done the blankets around and, to make it look like a really cool little camp area for them. And the next morning, the little boy at breakfast was like, Daddy, what did you need last night? And the father was very perplexed by this. And he was like, what do you mean? And he said, well, you came and you shook me awake. And the father said, no, I didn't. And he goes, but there was a man that stood over me and he wouldn't talk to me. And it scared me because I thought it was you. And he shook me awake. And then the little boy started to cry. Well, the father, was like really wide-eyed at this point. And the mom, the missionary mom, said that, she actually could feel spirits and she could feel energies. She didn't talk about it because it kind of was contrary to their particular faith. But she said that even though our home felt like a happy home, she said there was something really off about it. And these were really cool people. There were hugs and, we'll keep in touch as they were leaving. We never heard from them again. And the last thing that they said was the missionary, the male, grasped my mom's hand and he said, "We'll pray for your deliverance." And then they left and we never heard from him. So at that point, my mom was getting really scared. My uncle happened to be a deacon in a church. And so she called him to talk to him about some things. And he said some prayers and everything settled down. And we had no experiences whatsoever for a little while. And then things got it got worse. This was about the time that I had turned 16 and my health problems with my heart returned with a vengeance. They couldn't find anything. My blood work was fine. My heart was fine. I'd literally had a heart cath at the age of 16 and the heart was fine, but it was serious enough to where they thought I actually needed to have a full cath and the stress test and all of that other thing. I would have trouble breathing. I would have severe chest pains. I would black out. I would have times when my lips would turn blue, my hands would turn white, and I would hit the floor. I spent more time, I think, in the ER than I did in my classes that year. So because I was having trouble walking up and down stairs without getting winded, my mom basically switched where our rooms were. I went to her room. They took the loft. And I had gone to the point in the house where even though, the whole concept of, ooh, our house is haunted was kind of cool in my teenage brain, I was still a little scared at the same time, especially at night when I was alone. So I would sleep with the light on. And there was one night I woke up and there was a woman's voice and she was saying my name in kind of a sing-song manner. It was, kind of that, kind of manner. And so I was like, okay, I'm dreaming. I'm just not quite wide awake yet. So I rolled back over and started going back to sleep. And I heard a click of my lamp being turned off. And so I opened my eyes and my room was just pitch black. And then the sing-song voice started in again and it got deeper and it got deeper and it got deeper. And it sounded very husky, like a very husky female voice or a male voice. I wish I could emulate it for you because this was, it was like two-toned. It was a woman's voice and a man's voice on top of each other. And I understand, the concept of sleep paralysis where your brain wakes up before your body does and you can't move. This was different. I was wide awake. I had been able to move and roll over onto my back. So I wasn't sleep paralyzed. But then I felt the weight of somebody literally lying on top of me. And then I felt hands around my throat and it was choking and it was squeezing and I had tears rolling out of my eyes. And literally it was, I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move to struggle. There was nothing I could do. I've always loved, the Archangel Michael. And so I was like, okay, Michael, come help me. I didn't really know how to pray to him, so I was just like, can you come help me, please? And then all of a sudden, the pressure around my throat left and the feeling of somebody laying on me left and my light clicked back on. My neck was sore and actually I had fingerprint bruises on my neck for several days after that. And at this point, we knew we were starting to get into trouble. This wasn't just a haunted house. This was dangerous. Now, for years, we had thought that there was a male ghost in the house. We called him Richard. We didn't know what to call him. It was just the name that Mom and I both came up with at the same time. But he definitely was not a ghost. At best, he was a trickster spirit, but most likely, and we're pretty sure he was a demon. Mom and I would both have nightmares literally on the same night of being thrown down the stairs or being thrown into a well. And this happened multiple occasions. Again, that sensation of touching, it came across very predatory. We found out about recording things in the house. And of course, that was back with cassettes. But we did get an EVP one time that said, "You belong to me." I don't have that cassette any longer. I wish I did, because that was one of the creepiest ones in all my years of paranormal investigation, one of the creepiest ones I've ever heard. We would have these dreams about finding this hidden bag of money. And in my subsequent research, over my lifetime, this isn't an unusual thing. The box of gold or the box of coins or the hidden money to create obsession. I don't know if demons feed on this or what, or if it's just to make you feel like you're going crazy and they just find it fun to mess with your head like that. But Mom did rip up some floorboards one time, and I did go around with a metal detector across the yard, but it's probably a good thing if there had been anything that we never found it, because that could have possibly even been worse. But, the thing we called Richard, again, it wasn't the same thing that choked me. It could have been, but I don't believe so. But his entity had progressed to hitting and scratching. He would shove us. Weird things like we would drop knives and just barely miss having butcher knives hit our feet. Chairs would break underneath us. A light fixture fell out of the living room and barely missed hitting my mom. Those types of things had started going on. I mean, it was really starting to get violent at this point. Something had happened to my mom. She didn't tell me what at the time, but something had scared her to the point she called my uncle again. Now, my dad was at work, and my uncle came and did what he called a blessing. Before, he just, did some prayers. This time he said he did a blessing on the house. And in my subsequent years of doing paranormal research and also being a demonologist, he did a full cleansing. I never talked to him about it. Mom never said what he did, but whatever he did shut it down, like boom, gone. We never had another incident for, I would say, maybe 5 or 6 years. Nothing else went on in the house. And then I get a call from Mom. She had come home from the grocery store. She walked into the kitchen from the back door, and she'd had tomatoes sitting in a windowsill that she was letting ripen up because they weren't quite ripe. And they had been smashed all over the kitchen. She said it looked like blood running down the walls, although, she knew it was tomatoes. And she couldn't come up with a reasonable explanation as to how that happened. Obviously, my mother didn't do it. And so at this point, she calls and she tells me what's going on. And she admitted that things had started going wonky in the house again, that the covers were being ripped off the bed. Pictures were being turned upside down. If they were like on a table, they would be laid flat to where the photo would face the table instead of sitting up. Shoes on top of the refrigerator, just weird stuff going on in the house. And then she told me something that completely rocked my world. She said that the night before that she had called me, she'd been held down and she was attacked, and she was bruised and she was bleeding when she got up. And I'm not going to be crass and explain, but I'm sure that most of you can put 2 and 2 together with what I'm talking about. And I got mad. And I immediately told my boss I needed to leave for a family emergency, and I headed straight to her house. I had had enough. At this point, I'd been doing some paranormal investigation. I'd been studying some demonology. I had no idea what I was doing or what I was walking into. I knew just enough to be dangerous, and thank God I got lucky, because I can't explain how I do the things that I do, because it's different than the way it's traditionally taught. So I can't explain what I do. But this thing, I got it taken out of the house and to never return. Literally, this thing is, I'm standing there. I burned some sage because, Mom liked the sage. And the day before, she had tried to burn some sage, and literally she had a large, probably 8-inch stick of sage, and she lit it. And the thing burnt up into ashes in a matter of about 3 seconds. And she knew that something was really wrong. But when I was burning the sage, it was going okay. It was the last time I ever saw the spirit of my grandfather. And he's standing there just shaking his head like, you don't know what you're doing. You need to stop, that kind of thing. And I pressed on because I was too mad. And sometimes when you're too mad in a situation where you have a demonic entity, you can really get yourself in trouble because you're not thinking clearly. And I was not thinking clearly. So literally, it was sheer dumb luck that I walked away from that without my mom getting hurt really bad, or without me getting hurt really bad, or honestly, either one of us killed in this situation. I don't recommend anybody take on a demon if you don't know what you're doing. And a lot of times, if you think you know what you're doing, you shouldn't do it either. It is a calling. It is not something to go, ooh, I want to be a demonologist and go try to do some study. It's a calling, and there's a huge cost that people pay to get into this field. I mean, we do it because we want to help people, but at the same time, there's a huge cost to it. But I commanded this thing. I got it bound. I got it out of there. And again, it literally was sheer dumb luck. At that point, the house was fine for probably another 10 years until one last incident happened. My husband and I had gone up to spend the weekend with mom and dad. And I woke up in the middle of the night to a woman pacing at the end of the bed, back and forth and back and forth. And again, I can't explain how I do certain things, so I'm going to use the words, I told her to go away or to cross over to heaven or whatever. And at this point, her face contorted into this hideous face of pain and anguish. I punched my husband in the back, and he woke up and he could see her as well. And so I told her to leave again. And all of a sudden, the mattress and the box springs fell through the rails onto the floor with a big bang. Now, this thing was the typical bed rail slats. None of the slats broke. The rails weren't bent, but it was almost like something pulled the rails out for a second, enough to let the mattress drop, and then popped them back into place. So, of course, mom and dad heard this. They come downstairs. We're sitting there, dad's kind of laughing about it, picking on us being too fat for the bed or whatever, dad jokes. So he goes into the kitchen to get coffee, and the phone rings. Now I look at the clock. It is 3:00 in the morning when this happens. Who would be calling? And of course, your phone rings at 3:00 in the morning. You pick it up because it's usually an emergency or a prank call, one of the two, at 3:00 in the morning. So I pick it up, and in this raspy voice, this woman says my name. She goes, Ellie. And then the phone goes dead. I hung up the phone. I picked it up. The line was still dead. So then I see this same woman's face that I'd seen at the end of the bed looking in the living room window. So again, I quote unquote told her to leave. And at that point, she left and never came back. So this is probably chapter 1 of several stories I could tell you, but growing up haunted is what led me to get into the paranormal. It's what led me to be a demonologist, to be extremely skeptical of a lot of things that I hear and I see. When I was a teenager, I was gullible. Every noise, every sound, it had to be the ghost. And now I look for mundane explanations. I look for rationale. But my biggest goal is, how do I help the people that I work with? And luckily, I'm partnered with a wonderful husband who has the same passion to help people as I do. But growing up haunted, that's that particular part of the story of my life. And then from there, it just got weirder.
If you've had a paranormal experience and would like to be a guest on the show, please contact us by going to myparax.com. That's myparaex.com. Thanks for listening.